Next, we're going to talk about the youth and systems. Child welfare, juvenile justice, criminal justice, and other systems are disproportionately populated by youth who have experienced unstable housing. While sometimes well-intended, sometimes these systems have policies that negatively impact LGBTQ youth homelessness. Some key words for this topic: school to prison pipeline, trauma, foster parenting, training, job readiness, and opportunities to earn income while receiving that training. Here to help us discuss this is Angelica Ross. No? So there's been a constant change. I'm just reading the script they gave.
No, that's perfect. No, thank you. It is a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I want to say, Breezy, that was a beautiful poem. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And also, please bear with me. I have a cold. I sound horrible, and I'm on Dayquil, so that's what's going on.
We like you drugged up.
It's just like, oh, well, great, because there's a lot of it. So something I want to say about the presentation I'm going to do. You'll notice that there won't be any slides. I actually made a really, really pretty presentation for you all, but it doesn't look like we're going to be able to show it. So I'm actually going to be reading it from my phone. So I'm going to be looking at that, and I'm so sorry because it's so pretty. But what's that?
Who are you and where are you from?
My name's Imani Rupert, and I'm the director for the Broadway Youth Center. The Broadway Youth Center is, we're a center that works with primarily LGBT youth, but youth experiencing homelessness. Our biggest program is our drop-in program, where we're able to serve youth that come in and they're able to access basic needs, able to get something to eat, access programming, have access to getting birth certificates, state IDs, just anything that they feel like they need. We're a one-stop shop for a lot of things. We also have a medical component where folks can get very basic medical needs met, where we have STI and HIV testing. So it's a really great organization. If you want to hear more about it, definitely come see me. So the presentation that I'm gonna do today is actually based on the handout that you have under the Youth and Systems. But our conversation was actually a little bit, it was different. So when you talk about systems, it's a complex term, and there's a lot of language in there that people have different levels of understanding. So our notes were a little bit confusing, so I tried to create a presentation that might make it a little bit easier for you to take home with you. So I'm especially hurt that you won't be able to see the presentation because the intention was to make it really easy for you to understand it, because I think you'll notice it's a little bit confusing sort of looking at the notes here. But so I had the privilege of being able to co-facilitate this Youth and Systems presentation on Friday and then on Saturday as well. And it was amazing. We talked about a lot of things. And so the first thing that we sort of talked about was kind of what LZ talked about. So started with this prompt: child welfare, juvenile justice, criminal justice, and other systems are heavily populated by youth who have experienced housing instability. While often well-intended, sometimes these systems have policies that negatively impact LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness. So what we started was with our first question, and whenever we sort of got off topic, this is the question we'd come back to. If we could start over and solve LGBTQ youth homelessness through youth systems, if our resources were limited, if our access was limited, what would we create? And I'm going to share with you kind of what we talked about. So that was with youth in the room, and then also with providers in the room. No, I think I'll just juggle it. Thank you, appreciate it. So when we talked about the systems, there's two things that really came up over and over again. So those are the two systems I'm talking about. Young people sort of use criminal justice systems and juvenile justice systems interchangeably, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then also we talked about the Department of Child and Family Services, so DCFS. So in order to frame this feedback in a way that I thought might be easy for you to take home, I framed it in terms of balloons, bricks, and windows of opportunity. So balloons are things that, as providers, things that we're doing well. bricks are the things that, there's things that we're missing, we're not quite hitting what our youth are asking for and what they need. And then windows are opportunities that we see ways that we can turn our bricks into balloons, and some things that came up in some of our sections. So the first is the criminal justice system. And please forgive me, this is an infographic that I'm just gonna read for you guys. I really wish you could see it, it's beautiful. Yeah, if you come see me later, I'd be happy to show it to you. This is how I spent my night last night. There's significant overlap between foster care and juvenile justice systems. So LGBT youth are 2 times more likely than our heterosexual peers to have experienced abuse in group or foster home placement. And then also they're 2 times more likely to enter the system after having run away from home. And I think it's really important to talk about just sort of the intersections. We're looking at the most vulnerable of the vulnerable identities. And I think that that's something that we need to continuously come back to. And I'm going to try to speak to that a little bit in my presentation, and some of my colleagues have as well. And I think that's really important when we're doing this work, that we're not just looking at one part of the person, because many of our youth are experiencing a lot of marginalized identities. And so we need to talk about all of those identities. Otherwise, we're just talking about the most privileged among us. And we know a lot of times that our young people are not those people. According to the Center for American Progress, LGBT youth make up between 5 and 10% of the overall youth population, but 15% of the juvenile justice population, and then 48 of those people identify as Black or Latino. So again, we're looking at, so when we look at race, when we look at sexual orientation, when we look at gender presentation, we look at young people that don't have the privileges associated with adulthood. We look at socioeconomic class, we look at people experiencing homelessness. I just listed a lot of things that make some people's lives harder than others. And when we have these conversations, we need to talk about all of these things, because without talking about all of these things, we really only, again, are talking about the most privileged among us. So when we're thinking about this, please keep these things in mind. So our balloon for the criminal justice system, in our groups, we didn't come up with too many. And I think that's really telling, because, when we think about the criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system, very rarely do we have conversations about who is actually going through these systems and how that's affecting these individuals and what the outcomes are. And so the people in our room talked about that these aren't meeting their needs very well. The only balloon we can come up with is this is an attempt to try to keep people safe. But I think we know that this, more than anything, it keeps many of us unsafe. And again, we're talking about the most vulnerable among us that we're keeping unsafe. And that's something that is absolutely unacceptable, and something we really need to be careful of. Because we can't always be hurting the most vulnerable among us, but that seems to be always what happens. So our bricks are, there are very few opportunities to have records expunged. So sometimes youth feel trapped and feel like they never got a fair shake, they never got to start off on the right foot. And when you think about how devastating that is to just want, someone said earlier, talking about just needing a job. Sometimes people are arrested just because they need a job, and they're not able to get jobs because based on their gender identity or sexual orientation. And so they find alternative work. And then when they grow up, when they get older, these things are things that stick with them. It makes it so that they have a very difficult time later in life just trying to make a living wage. A living wage the way they want to, and that's something that needs to be corrected. And then we also need to think about our discriminating treatment of transgender non-conforming folks. We've talked so much, but our gender non-conforming and trans folks are more susceptible of violence when incarcerated, vulnerability, and general harassment, and that's something we need to think about. Because again, we're talking about the most marginalized of the marginalized, and we know that the T is so often left out of the LGBT when we're having these conversations, and we see that in the numbers that are represented. And we all know that we don't have money for things if we don't have numbers. So that's very telling that even within this community, that we have a group that's continuously left out of that conversation, and an increased risk for violence. And we know that this also the numbers are just so much higher for trans women of color. And again, when we think about marginalized identities, it's something we really need to consider. So for windows, like some people were talking about before, we need to really create a restorative justice model. Because we want to remember that our goal is to give folks more options, not take options away from people. In our juvenile justice system, you know, we need to talk about alternative models for nonviolent crimes. When we think about what are our systems, are the systems we have, are they producing what we want? And we have to think about that. We need to be intentional about what we're doing. Who does it serve to incarcerate the most vulnerable among us? Is that serving anyone? Is that the kind of work that we want to do? Is that helping us? And we need to be thoughtful about that, because if that answer is no, then